Early winter in Boston, clouds were gathering in the sky, hinting at snow. Melissa Hopkins gazed out the window of the hospital pharmacy, feeling the end of a long day. There was a pile of prescriptions on her desk, but the clock already showed it was time to leave. "Melissa, you should head home now. Lizzie must be waiting," said Martha, the senior pharmacist, with a gentle voice. Melissa returned a grateful smile and began taking off her white coat. "Thank you. David said he would be home early today, so I want to prepare dinner for the family." Melissa's soft expression and gentle demeanor were why patients trusted her as a pharmacist. In her eyes, one could see both the strength she had gained from overcoming past pain and the anticipation of new happiness. As she left the hospital, a cold wind caressed her cheeks. Melissa tightened the scarf around her neck and hurried toward the parking lot. Once in her car, she immediately checked her cell phone. There was a message from her daughter's babysitter. "Lizzie is doing well today." But she said something unusual. She said, "Something is moving in Mommy's tummy." What an imaginative child she is. Melissa smiled. 6-year-old Lizzie had always been surprisingly perceptive. Perhaps she had sensed something even before Melissa realized she was pregnant. This new life with David, in their second year of marriage, was a miracle after years of fertility treatments. While driving, Melissa remembered meeting David Carter 2 years ago. He had visited the hospital as a pharmaceutical sales representative, and his sincere attitude and warm smile had captured her heart. For her, struggling with loneliness as a single mother after her divorce, David's presence was like a beacon of light. What she appreciated most was how David loved Lizzie as if she were his own daughter. How many times had Melissa shed tears watching him play catch with Lizzie in the park on holidays or read her bedtime stories at night? If there was one small shadow, it would be the presence of David's mother, Edna. "The woman who stole my son." Melissa could sense this was what Edna thought whenever she felt the woman's cold gaze. Though Edna was outwardly polite, it was clear she viewed Lizzie as another man's child, especially. Despite this, Melissa tried to maintain a good relationship with her. When she arrived home, Lizzie came running out of the entrance. Seeing her daughter with golden curls bouncing and blue eyes shining, Melissa's fatigue instantly vanished. "Mom. Today we learned about constellations at school." Melissa hugged her daughter and kissed her cheek. "Really? What constellations did you learn about?" Lizzie began proudly sharing her astronomical knowledge. Midway through her story, she suddenly fell silent and placed her small hand on Melissa's stomach. "Mom, is a baby growing in here?" Melissa gasped in surprise. She hadn't told anyone yet. "Why do you think that, Lizzie?" "I saw it in a dream. A small light was shining in your tummy." Melissa smiled and stroked her daughter's head. "Daddy and I weren't completely sure yet. But yes, it seems we're having a baby." Lizzie remained silent for a while, staring at Melissa's stomach. Eventually, she said in a small voice, "Mom, is that baby going to be okay?" Melissa was puzzled but answered reassuringly, "Of course. It's going to be a very healthy baby." Lizzie nodded, but there was still a shadow of something unsaid in her eyes. While preparing dinner, David came home. With his dark brown hair and refreshing smile, he opened his arms to welcome Melissa as always. "Welcome home," Melissa said, embraced in her husband's arms. "I've prepared a special dinner tonight." David looked into his wife's eyes and asked, "Did something happen?" Melissa answered with a smile, "Lizzie already knows. She knows we're having a baby." Joy spread across David's face. He gently placed his hand on his wife's abdomen and asked, "Really? Did you confirm with Dr. Green?" "I got the blood test results yesterday. I'm already 5 weeks along." David hugged his wife tightly and called for Lizzie. "Lizzie, come here. Let's toast together." Lizzie approached them with cautious steps. David embraced her too and asked, "You're going to be a big sister. Are you happy?" Lizzie nodded slowly. "Yes, but what?" David asked with a laugh. Lizzie looked at both her parents' faces alternately, about to say something, but ultimately remained silent. Nothing. Melissa was concerned about her daughter's behavior but focused on celebrating this special day. David poured champagne for himself and Melissa, and grape juice for Lizzie, and the three made a toast. "To our new family." At David's words, Melissa shed tears of happiness. However, she didn't notice the shadow of anxiety in Lizzie's blue eyes as the little girl held her glass with small hands. Late that night in the bedroom, David gently kissed Melissa's abdomen. "It's been a long road. To think we're finally having a child together." Melissa, running her fingers through her husband's hair, replied, "Including Lizzie, we'll have 3 children." David quickly corrected himself. "Of course. Lizzie has been my daughter from the beginning. Blood ties don't matter." Reassured by his words, Melissa fell asleep feeling happy. However, in the middle of the night, she heard small sobs coming from Lizzie's room. Rushing there, she found Lizzie trembling in bed. "What's wrong, Lizzie?" "A bad dream." Lizzie looked up at her mother with tear-stained cheeks. "Mom, please don't have that baby." Melissa was shocked and embraced her daughter. "Why? Are you afraid of becoming a big sister?" Lizzie shook her head slightly. "No, the baby is in danger." "It's all right, Lizzie. It's just a bad dream," Melissa comforted her. "Let's go back to sleep." On a spring morning in Boston, entering her 7th month of pregnancy, Melissa was surprised at how pale she looked in the mirror. For the past few weeks, she had been experiencing headaches, fatigue, and occasional numbness in her limbs. As a pharmacist, she was sensitive to changes in her body, but being her first pregnancy, she also felt considerable anxiety. "Are you okay?" David placed his hand on her shoulder from behind. "You don't look well." Melissa tried to reassure her husband with a forced smile. "I'm just a bit tired. I'll consult about it at today's checkup." "I wish I could go too, but I have a meeting with clients that I absolutely can't miss today," David said apologetically. "Don't worry. Both mother and child are healthy," Melissa answered, as if trying to convince herself. While waiting for her turn in the hospital waiting room, Melissa observed Lizzie, who was sitting next to her. Since school was on spring break, her daughter was with her today. Lizzie was quietly reading a picture book, but occasionally she would look at Melissa's stomach with anxious eyes. "Lizzie, what's wrong?" Melissa asked gently. Lizzie looked up from her book and said hesitantly, "Mom, I feel like the baby is suffering." Melissa felt her heart tighten but tried to remain calm. "Why do you think that?" "I saw it in a dream." The baby was saying, "Help me." Lizzie's blue eyes were serious. Melissa stroked her daughter's head and said, "It's just a dream, Lizzie. The baby is growing well." Mrs. Hopkins, a nurse, called, and Melissa and Lizzie headed to the examination room. Dr. Rachel Green was an experienced obstetrician who had been monitoring Melissa's pregnancy from the beginning. She greeted Melissa with a kind smile, but as the examination progressed, her expression clouded. "Your blood pressure is a bit high. And you're showing symptoms of anemia," Dr. Green said while writing something in her chart. "Let's do some additional blood tests to be safe." The test results came back a few days later. There was concern in Dr. Green's voice. "There are some abnormalities in your numbers, but they're not at a serious level yet. However, we need to monitor your progress carefully from now on." Melissa sighed in relief. "Is the baby okay?" "There are no particular problems with the fetus's development, but I'm concerned about your health," Dr. Green said with a serious expression. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any changes in food or environment?" Melissa thought for a moment. "Not particularly, except that my mother-in-law sometimes brings homemade herbal teas and health foods. I see. I'll prescribe iron and vitamin supplements just to be safe, the doctor said while writing a prescription. And please contact me immediately if you notice any changes. As they were leaving the examination room, Lizzie stared intently at Dr. Green. When the doctor smiled kindly at her, Lizzie said in a small voice, "Doctor, please save the baby." Dr. Green was a bit surprised but quickly softened her expression. "Of course, Lizzie. That's my job." In the car on the way home, Melissa was bothered by Lizzie's words. "Why did you say that to the doctor?" Lizzie gazed out the window and answered, "Because the baby is in danger." That night, while Melissa was working at the hospital pharmacy, David took Lizzie to the park. Meanwhile, Edna visited their home and left homemade herbal tea and soup in the refrigerator. When Melissa returned home, there was a handwritten note on the table. "Dear Melissa, I've left herbal tea and soup to help regulate your body. Please drink a little each day. It's for the baby too." Melissa felt grateful as she took the herbal tea from the refrigerator. The greenish liquid had a distinctive aroma. The next day, during a break at the hospital, Jennifer, a colleague and close friend, sat next to Melissa. "How are you feeling?" she asked worriedly. Melissa sighed. "To be honest, not great. I have terrible headaches and sometimes get dizzy." Jennifer frowned. "Have you talked to Dr. Green about it?" "Yes, I had a blood test, but she said there's no serious problem." "Still, you mentioned you're concerned about Lizzie's behavior," Jennifer said, carefully choosing her words. "A child's intuition shouldn't be underestimated. Especially a sensitive child like Lizzie." Melissa pondered her friend's words. "It's true, Lizzie has been saying Grandma is giving you bad things. But Edna is looking out for me. She brings me homemade herbal teas and soups." Jennifer's expression changed. "Homemade? Why always homemade? Store-bought isn't good enough." Melissa shrugged. "Edna is knowledgeable about natural remedies. She says that store-bought products contain chemicals. Why don't you analyze that herbal tea once?" Jennifer suggested with a serious expression. Melissa laughed and said, "Are you suspecting my mother-in-law?" "Just a suggestion," Jennifer said lightly, but there was deep concern in her eyes. After dinner that day, while David was reading a picture book to Lizzie, Melissa, out of curiosity, separated a small amount of the herbal tea and performed a simple analysis in the hospital laboratory. She found no abnormalities, though there were some components she couldn't identify. "Maybe I'm just being overly concerned," Melissa told herself. A few days later, Lizzie rushed to David as soon as she returned from the park. "Daddy, Grandma is doing something bad," she said with a serious face. David looked at his daughter with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" "Grandma is giving Mom bad things. The baby is in danger." David's expression hardened. "Lizzie, you shouldn't say such things. Grandma is concerned about Mom and the baby, bringing her things to help her stay healthy." "But I don't want to hear any more," David said in an unusually stern tone. "Grandma is not a bad person. Saying things like that will make her sad." Lizzie fell silent and walked to her room with slumped shoulders. That night, she began crying in her sleep again, screaming that the baby is suffering. Melissa was worried about Lizzie's mental state and consulted a child psychologist. "This is adjustment anxiety about a new family member," the psychologist said. "Lizzie experienced your divorce from her previous husband and feels a sense of loss from losing her father. Now she may fear losing her mother's love to the new baby." Melissa tried to accept this explanation, but Lizzie's anxiety and warnings grew stronger by the day. One day, entering her 8th month of pregnancy, Melissa was suddenly hospitalized due to abdominal pain and bleeding. "There's a risk of premature birth," Dr. Green said worriedly. You need to be hospitalized and placed under strict supervision for a while. David brought Lizzie to visit Melissa in her hospital bed. Lizzie held her mother's hand and tearfully said, "Mom, don't see Grandma. The baby is in danger." Melissa looked into her daughter's serious eyes. Over the past month, her health had deteriorated rapidly. The doctors couldn't identify the cause. And now, even the baby in her womb was in a dangerous condition. For the first time, Melissa began to seriously listen to Lizzie's words. "What do you mean, Lizzie? What do you say Grandma did?" Lizzie looked around, and after confirming that David had stepped out, she said in a small voice, "Grandma put something in your tea. I saw it. Green powder." A chill ran down Melissa's spine. The hallways of Boston General Hospital were quiet. Only the sound of rain announcing the end of summer occasionally broke the silence as it hit the windows. It was on that rainy morning that Melissa began to feel contractions, 2 weeks before her due date. "Control your breathing. That's it, slowly," Dr. Green encouraged Melissa with a calm voice. "The contractions are getting closer. We'll move you to the delivery room soon." Melissa nodded on the bed, her face contorted in pain. More than the doctor's words, it was the presence of her 6-year-old daughter sitting beside her that kept her calm. Lizzie had lost her usual childlike demeanor and was sitting remarkably composed, holding her mother's hand. Her blue eyes, mixing past fears and future determination, looked strangely mature. "Lizzie, could you wait at the nurse's station until your father comes?" Melissa asked between pains. Lizzie shook her head. "I'll stay by Mom's side. I promised." Melissa smiled weakly. After her hospitalization, she had begun to listen to her daughter's words. She had started to suspect a connection between her health problems and the herbal tea after hearing what Lizzie said about Edna. However, she hadn't had the courage to tell David. Suddenly, the door opened and David hurriedly entered the hospital room. "Melissa." "I rushed out of the meeting as soon as I heard." He rushed to his wife's side and gently kissed her forehead. "Are you okay? How's the pain?" "Manageable." Melissa tried to smile, but her face contorted as the next wave of contractions hit. David placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Lizzie, you've done well. Thank you for not leaving Mom alone." Lizzie looked up at her father with an unusually serious expression and said, "Daddy, don't let Grandma come." David was momentarily confused but quickly regained his gentle smile. "Don't worry. Today is a special day for Mom and the baby. We won't let anyone interfere." Nurses entered the room and began preparing to move Melissa to the delivery room. While David was checking his cell phone in the hallway, Lizzie held Melissa's hand and whispered in her ear, "Mom, don't be afraid. I'll protect you." Melissa gazed at her daughter's face. There was a calmness and determination in those eyes that seemed beyond her 6 years. "Thank you, Lizzie. Mom will be fine." On the way to the delivery room, they unexpectedly ran into Edna in the elevator hall. David's mother was wearing a black coat and carrying a small paper bag. "David." Edna's voice was mixed with surprise. "I hadn't heard about the premature birth." "Mom, why are you here?" David was equally surprised. "I brought some herbal tea to cheer Melissa up. It's good for pregnant women," Edna said, holding up the paper bag. Lizzie's face turned pale. She stood close to Melissa's stretcher and glared at Edna. "No!" Lizzie shouted unusually loudly. "Grandma, stay away from Mom." "Lizzie!" David scolded his daughter in a stern voice. Edna's expression didn't change, rather, she looked at Lizzie with what seemed like pity. "Poor thing, it's just jealousy. She's afraid of the new baby being born." Dr. Green intervened. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we need to focus on the delivery now. Would you mind waiting in the waiting room?" "Yes, of course," Edna responded obediently, but for a moment, something cold flashed in her eyes. But I want to be there until the end. David placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. Mom, could you wait a bit? I'll be back soon. Before entering the delivery room, Lizzie once again grabbed Melissa's hand and quietly said, "It's okay. I'm watching." "Lizzie, you can't come in here," the nurse said gently. "Please wait in the waiting room with your father." Lizzie reluctantly nodded and sent Melissa a meaningful look before leaving. The delivery room was filled with bright lights and the sounds of medical equipment. Melissa felt the hustle and bustle around her as distant as she surrendered to the waves of contractions. The calm instructions of Dr. Green and the nursing team reached her through the haze of her consciousness. "Just a little more, Melissa. I can see the baby's head." Outside, Lizzie sat still in a corner of the waiting room. David sat beside her, while Edna was sitting a short distance away, holding a magazine but showing no signs of turning the pages. "Daddy, I want some water," Lizzie suddenly said. "There's a vending machine here." David stood up. "I'll be right back." As soon as David left, Lizzie looked at Edna. Edna stared back at her. A heavy silence flowed between them. "I know what Grandma did," Lizzie said in a small but firm voice. Edna's expression froze for a moment. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you putting green powder in Mom's tea." Edna pursed her lips and leaned toward Lizzie. "A child like you can't understand the adult world." The baby was saying it was suffering. Lizzie didn't back down. "I'm going to tell the police." The color drained from Edna's face. At that moment, a sudden noise was heard from the hallway, and the sound of medical staff hurriedly running echoed. Lizzie and Edna stood up simultaneously. When David returned with water, Lizzie was already running. "Lizzie! Where are you going?" In the delivery room, Melissa's pain had reached its peak. "Push. Just a little more." Dr. Green's voice echoed. Melissa gathered all her strength and gave one final push. At that moment, the baby's first cry should have filled the room. Instead, an unexpected silence fell. Dr. Green's expression froze. She took the baby and immediately gave instructions to the nurses. "The baby?" Melissa asked in an exhausted voice. "What's wrong?" Dr. Green maintained her professional mask, but there was obvious distress in her eyes. "There's something with the baby's body." David, who had finally rushed into the delivery room, changed color when he heard those words. "What do you mean?" "The baby is alive. It's just..." Dr. Green struggled to find words. A nurse cleaned the baby, wrapped it lightly, and showed it to Melissa. Melissa gasped. The baby was pale and breathing weakly. And there were strange rashes and discolorations all over its body. What's happening?" Melissa's voice trembled. David almost collapsed. "Our child." At that moment, Lizzie, who had sneaked into the room unnoticed, appeared beside the bed. She stared at the baby and whispered softly, "I knew it." Everyone in the room noticed Lizzie and gasped. "Lizzie, you shouldn't be here," the nurse said. But Lizzie ignored her and said in a clear voice, "Grandma was giving her poison. I saw it." A deathly silence enveloped the room. David looked at Lizzie, speechless. "What are you saying?" David finally managed to say. "Grandma was putting green powder in Mom's tea. She said she hated the baby." Lizzie's voice was small but resonated throughout the room. Dr. Green quickly gave instructions to the nurses. "Take the baby to the NICU immediately. And take a blood sample from the mother for emergency testing." The nurses acted quickly, and the baby was taken to the neonatal intensive care unit. "It's a boy," one of the nurses told Melissa before leaving. "He's fighting." Melissa nodded while crying. David held his wife's hand and said in a trembling voice, "It's going to be okay, he'll get better." But there was doubt and fear in his eyes. He couldn't judge whether Lizzie's words were true or just a child's imagination. The test results were shocking. Traces of heavy metals and herbal medicine components were detected in the baby's body. Similar substances were found in Melissa's blood, and the doctors pointed to the possibility of long-term ingestion of small amounts. "We need to report this to the police," Dr. Green said with a stern expression. Melissa was still unable to accept the reality and just cried. David, though dazed, finally placed his hand on Lizzie's shoulder. "Lizzie, tell me the truth. Tell me exactly what Grandma did." Lizzie seemed a bit surprised by the unexpected trust from an adult. She slowly nodded and began to tell the truth with trembling lips. The flashing lights of a police siren quietly illuminated the lobby of Boston General Hospital. Detectives Martin and Clark arrived at the hospital 3 hours after the baby was born. With impassive expressions, they followed the hospital staff's guidance to Melissa's room. "Ms. Hopkins, Mr. Carter," Detective Martin quietly called out. It wasn't the first time the experienced detective had dealt with such a family crisis. "May we talk to you?" Melissa was still in shock, staring at the detective with vacant eyes. David, holding his wife's hand, nodded with a grave expression. "First, could you tell us about your child's condition?" Detective Clark asked gently. She was a female detective in her early 30s who often handled cases involving children. "Noah, our son's name is Noah," David said in a trembling voice. "He's receiving treatment in the NICU now." According to the doctor, traces of heavy metals and herbal medicine components were detected in his body. The two detectives exchanged glances and took notes. "We'd like to ask about your mother, Edna Carter," Detective Martin carefully chose his words. David's face contorted with anguish. "My mother is now in another room with a nurse. She hasn't said anything yet." "We heard you have a daughter named Lizzie," Detective Clark said. "May we speak with her?" At that moment, the door to the hospital room quietly opened, and Lizzie peered in. She didn't flinch at the sight of the police officers, rather, she seemed relieved. "You must be Lizzie," Detective Clark smiled kindly. "Could you tell us a little about what happened?" Lizzie nodded and sat in the chair in front of the detectives. She straightened her small back and began speaking in a surprisingly calm voice. "I saw Grandma putting green powder in Mom's tea many times. She said in the kitchen, 'This will purify the tainted blood.'" The air in the room froze. David gasped, and Melissa let out a small sob. "When did you first see this?" Detective Martin asked. "I think after Mom told everyone about the baby," Lizzie answered thoughtfully. Grandma's face was scary. It was different from usual. The detectives took detailed statements from Lizzie, Melissa, and David. Then they headed to another room to question Edna. Edna Carter sat upright in her chair with a dignity that belied her 63 years. She didn't change her expression when the detectives entered and quietly turned her gaze to them. "Mrs. Carter, do you know anything about the harmful substances detected in your grandson's body?" Detective Martin asked directly. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Edna answered calmly. "I was just bringing healthy herbal tea out of concern for my son's wife's health." "We've obtained a warrant to search your home," Detective Clark said quietly. "Investigators are already on their way." Edna's expression wavered momentarily but quickly recovered. "Feel free. I have nothing to hide." Late that night, investigators found decisive evidence in Edna's home. Various herbal medicines, heavy metal compounds, and a notebook titled, "How to Get Rid of the Daughter-in-Law." The notebook contained detailed plans to make Melissa mentally unstable and induce a miscarriage as a strategy to get my son back. That wasn't all. In a corner of her bedroom, there were pictures of Melissa and Lizzie with red X marks over them. Confronted with the evidence, Edna continued to resist throughout the night. But by the next morning, she confessed, looking exhausted. That woman is not worthy of my son, Edna said coldly. Especially that stepchild who doesn't carry the Carter blood. I just wanted to prevent the pure Carter bloodline from mixing with tainted blood. Edna's confession reached David's ears. He visited his mother and, with the detective's permission, confronted her. Why, Mother? David asked quietly. His voice was tinged more with deep sadness than anger. Edna stared straight back at her son. It was for your own good, David. You shouldn't have become a family with that woman and her stepchild. David was silent for a long time. Finally, he said quietly, I'm cutting ties with you, Mother. How could you not understand that family is bound by love, not blood? At the hospital, Melissa was spending time alone with Lizzie. Noah was receiving intensive care in the NICU, and the doctors were carefully monitoring his condition. Mom, will Noah be okay? There was anxiety in Lizzie's voice. Melissa answered while embracing her daughter, the doctors are doing their best to treat him. Noah is a strong boy. Lizzie buried her face in Melissa's chest. I could hear Noah's voice. He was saying, help me. Melissa gasped. She was once again amazed at her daughter's extraordinary intuition. If it weren't for you, Noah would have. She choked on her words. Lizzie slowly raised her face and looked into her mother's eyes. Mom, I'm Noah's big sister. I had to protect him. In that moment, Melissa understood from the bottom of her heart that Lizzie was not just a child but a brave soul who had saved this family. In the evening, Dr. Green visited the hospital room with a serene expression. I have good news, she said with a smile. Noah's condition has stabilized a bit. Of course, we're not out of the woods yet, but the appropriate detoxification treatment is beginning to show effects. Melissa and Lizzie looked at each other, finding a ray of hope. When David returned to the hospital room, his expression was bright. I just saw Noah. He's small, but he's a fighter, he embraced his wife and daughter. We will get through this together. Dr. Green's expression became a bit stern. However, to be honest, there may be long-term health issues. There could be developmental delays or immune system problems. Early treatment and rehabilitation will be necessary. No matter what happens, we will face it together as a family, Melissa said with quiet determination. David knelt before Lizzie and said with a serious expression, Lizzie, your brother might not have survived without you. Thank you so much. Lizzie nodded. Noah is strong. He'll get better. Lizzie, actually, I've always wanted to adopt you formally as Lizzie Carter, as my official daughter. David looked into Lizzie's eyes sincerely. Blood ties don't matter. We are already family. Tears welled up in Lizzie's eyes. Really? Really? Lizzie called David Daddy for the first time and hugged him tightly. In that moment, they became a true family. Edna was charged with assault and planned harm. At the trial, Lizzie bravely took the witness stand and testified in detail about Edna's actions.